Yeah, so 2 hour, as you mentioned, a 2 hour session today. And so what today's focus is going to be on, so superintendent will give kind of an overview on what to expect to see, and then some themes you'll see in more detail as we go through the presentation. And then I think this is going to be really valuable. I don't put credit to it. I suppose you read it for the format, but asking the chief on the instructional side to walk through their budgets, prioritization, what's in, what's out. So rather than hearing about it from finance people, hearing about it from people that are responsible for the strategy and responsible for executing the strategy. So I think it's going to be a good, engaging conversation. So I have high expectations.
Okay.
So what's your first bit of awesome sections? Okay. Okay. Would you like to?
No.
Okay. Works good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. So we're going to do another work session for another layer of detail. We're getting into these conversations in the various forums. We all have the first edition proposed budget, but what we wanted to start to do is kind of go a layer deeper. And as we thought about how to format these conversations and how to kind of break those down to give a high enough, enough of an understanding, even if it's a little bit high level, about how we're scoping out the work. And so to try to give some story behind the numbers that are in here. Caveat, this is a new administration with new leaders behind some of the departments, and some still don't have leaders in place. And so much of what you'll hear them describe is an affirmation of what their essential functions are and a couple priority areas that we'll be focused on moving forward for 18-19 December. And so anything more detailed than that will get a little bit more nebulous. What we're going to focus on today is sort of the academic side of the organization. So it's an organization moving forward that we're proposing will be led by 2 deputy superintendents. We identified Dr. Yvonne Curtis to come aboard recently to the sort of the schools, the instructional student support side of it. So she's going to describe that, and each of the chiefs or department leaders for that are going to join her in talking through how they are beginning to reimagine those portions of the organization and the work ahead. A lot of resources, if you sort of start to highlight the book, if you started to do that, you'll notice chunks of money moving around. It's not that there was new money, but a lot of it is getting reconfigured or reorganized or realigned. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison. It's because we're situating the work as we reduce resources into new areas under new leadership. So you're going to hear about that. And if there's time, we'll talk a little bit at a high level about the superintendent's office. At the next session, we're planning, depending on the level of questioning, which we're going to be noting today because we may not have all the details you want and we want to give you good information. We'll take on the other half of the organization, the business and operations side of which is experiencing a lot of change and flux itself right now. So, but we'll share with you how we are setting up the resource management to continue those core functions in the work ahead. So we'll get into those. And then we'll have to think about how we wedge in some of the other central senior leadership functions like legal and chief of staff offices as well, under the superintendent umbrella. So, but today the vast majority is going to be in teaching and learning, student support services, and schools. So I'm going to hand it from here over to Dr. Curtis, who's going to kick off 3 presentations, each provided by our 2 chiefs and assistant superintendent.
And mine is the shortest, but what I see as the most important thing for me to do is to ensure alignment across all the work that we do in schools with instruction as the focus. So my mission, or the mission of the whole division, is to develop a coherent and aligned educational system focused on the instructional core. The instructional core means the center where teachers, content, and students are together in a relationship around learning that prepares all of them for college, career, citizenship, and a wonderful life. So the priorities for me would be to develop a relational collaborative team culture that intentionally builds trust, engages in healthy debate, is committed to results, and holds one another accountable for student success. Accountability is really about shared accountability. We really can't hold ourselves to accountability unless we do it together as a team, because there's too much to do and we all hold a different part of that. We need to develop a practice of systems thinking that models cross-departmental work, and that doesn't mean just in the departments in our division, but across the entire organization. We know the intent of everyone in this organization is to help students, but in our division, we're the ones who actually know how to do that. So we have to work with the other departments so they can understand how what they do at any level of detail actually does serve kids. So that's what we'll do in that part. Develop an educational system where every student enjoys access to rigorous and relevant learning experiences that prepares each for a successful future. So this is, we've been having these conversations about what are the levels called. So that's what this chart is just showing, that high level of, in my division, I'm the deputy. I will have 3 chiefs. One is the Office of School Support, the chief of schools, who oversees the Office of Student Performance, which you hear referred to as OSP. Then we have a chief academic officer, which is Luis. He is over the Office of Teaching and Learning, which we refer to as OTL. And then the chief of Student Support Services, which is the Office of Student Support Services, which has a longer acronym, OSSS. So each of those departments has another layer, and actually there's layers within that. If you look at the chief of schools, they'll be organized into school cohorts, and there will be an area assistant superintendent and area director working as a team to support each cohort. In the Office of Teaching and Learning is where we'll have senior directors, program administrators, and TOSAs, who end up doing organizing and doing most of the professional development around teaching and learning. In the Office of Student Support Services, it looks much like OTL in that there will be senior directors, program administrators, and TOSAs as well. So our division budget is 24.5% of the general fund, which is $159.6 million. Of the $650 million of the whole budget. So you see the acronym, I'm having trouble with that word today, DISC, it stands for Division of Instruction in School Communities. So my part of our division's budget is 0.3%. It's 0.1% of the general fund, and that's just essentially my assistant and any resources we use just between the two of us. School performance is 22.3% of the division budget. I'm going to show you a slide in a little bit that shows where most of that budget goes. And then the general fund is 5.5% of the general fund. Student support services is 52.5% of our division budget. It's 12.9% of the general fund. And teaching and learning is 24.8% of the division budget, 6.8% of general fund budget.
So is this all general fund budget that we're looking at today?
Yes.
This is
Only
all just
general.
general fund.
So, can I just ask a
Questions?
I'll follow. Go ahead.
So for the, under the OSP,
Yes.
school cohorts, do we know yet how many there are going to be?
We have not decided. We're putting out a job description and postings. We have been cultivating candidates for months. We're looking forward to meeting talented candidates. We're looking to bring on board anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 assistant superintendents, depending on their skill set. We will be organizing our entire school portfolio into cohorts of schools There may be one assistant sup working side by side with the area director. There might be an assistant superintendent paired with 2 area directors and double cohorting. But the whole point is, we know in school, in district reform and school improvement, that our school community and our leaders need direct coaching, guidance, and supervision. And so we're looking to bring forward an elevated role of assistant superintendent where folks have the systems thinking training to come in and be able to support that kind of work with schools and network. And so I can't tell you that there's going to be 4 cohorts or 5 cohorts. Likely there will be some pairings in the K-8s, and there's probably an assistant super as a deep high school experience to support the multiple pathways as well. So that's to be determined. Of course, I'll look forward to sharing a more specific cohort listing and organization chart as we get into active interview mode over the next few weeks.
Starting with the chief.
Starting with the chief, who can help inform those decisions.
Our intention is to find the right people with the right skill sets, and if we don't find them all right now, we will organize in a way to support this new way of working together. One of the things we'd also like the assistant superintendents and the area directors to do as a team is really work as a team. Because oftentimes we find in school buildings, and I know I experienced this myself when I was a brand new assistant principal, is oftentimes you get the discipline work, but you really don't get that opportunity to see how the whole school works. And then when you move into a principal position, you're still pretty green. You don't have those experiences. So we would like the assistant superintendent and director to work in partnership with one who has more experience and more knowledge, developing that as a model for how the schools should be working together. And that will be part of how we hold them accountable as well. So that you're always thinking about you're developing that next person to take your place. So we have a lot of strong educators in PPS right now, but we don't know that they yet have the skill set to move to that next level, and yet we know they're good leaders, so we put them in that, and then they oftentimes feel like they're starting over, or some issues hit them that they've never experienced. So that's part of the development work we'll do with them.
So I would only add, because I know that this has not been a typical organizational structure in PPS, what's become very clear is that there's a need to enhance the capacity for school supervision, principal support. And so this is a deep area of work for me in my own experience. And so I'm very excited to be able to elevate the role of principal supervisors as not just brokers in the organization who are trying through relationship to bring strategic interventions and supports to their schools. The school has to work in a much more organized and scientific way. And so our conversations and our planning forward is how do these 3 offices in particular are going to work in interdepartmental ways to share those day-to-day, week-to-week struggles or areas that are in need of greater support by leveraging a reduced number of people working more surgically to support schools. And so bringing aboard people who come with that mindset is going to be really important.
And I know that it looks like later on in the presentation, the equity work is going to come up, but it's missing this box from the original org chart that was sent around last week. But I want to just make a comment and make sure under the school performance net issue, when you're talking about principal leadership, I have been with the community this week spending a lot of time with families around the lack of kind of cultural awareness and competencies at the administrative levels that are really causing issues for the children that we're serving. So that equity box certainly needs to remain.
So I've not published any organizational structure that has
well, what we saw last week, yeah, there was a box of your
The one that showed next to you.
It did.
Yeah, under the superintendent. So
Yeah,
I'll
so
talk
that's-
about that a bit later, but I'll just assume everybody at every layer and level of the organization is bringing in equity lens. We need to be clear about what that actually looks like
Yeah.
in practice, and that's critical about how our policies are enacted. And we'll talk about this as we get into the presentation, but.
And I'll keep saying, and then it needs to have its own distinct place,
Right.
so.
Right, so everybody needs that awareness in their practice, and our intention is to make sure that leadership that we bring aboard represent the demographic that we serve, and that our talent in this building represents a level of diversity that it should.
Can I just add one thing, which, I'm sorry, just quickly, as that's on my mind about the diversity here, is there some place that we'll see actually the people that were given notice or that have given notice to us in terms of the diversity of that group that was, their positions were cut and the individuals that were cut? I would like to see kind of the racial lens of that.
We can talk to
That would be
our,
great.
our chief of HR
Thanks.
as appropriate, and I'll just make a statement. If folks, I better not say it. Okay, moving on.
Just 25 years ago, when the district had money, there were at least 3 regional offices that probably correspond in some sense to cohorts in terms of providing additional supervision to schools.
But you're not talking, are you talking about a geographic?
Yeah, and that's not what
I've not presented what the area would look like, likely a regional geographic in a way that makes sense, but there are different ways to slice it. And I've tried it different ways over many years. It's really about the work that's being done and the expertise that's required and how school communities work in networked ways around similar problems of practice and challenges. So that's what moves the needle.
and leadership development.
Well, that's what I was going to say, that I really appreciated about your comments, Dr. Curtis, which is that we have not historically had the mechanisms in place for developing our pipeline of school leaders, so.
And the truth is that the budget doesn't actually have a lot of dollars specifically for leadership development, but what I've learned is when you identify that, then you start to build all your structures, thinking about developing everybody throughout the organization. So, for example, the first place I have to start is with me and my chiefs, and we need to continually develop both our relationship and our understanding by learning from one another and also looking out. Then we will work to, and we already have a retreat set on the calendar in January, once we get all these positions filled, to then, June, not January, June, to then work with the next layer, which is the senior directors and directors across all 3, the assistant superintendents and area directors as well. So that will become a team that will develop all together so that all of us understand that instructional leadership piece through an equity lens. So that will always be part of that work. And so our superintendent is correct. In our side, that equity reigns through everything we do because it's the lens that we're doing, and we will call out what those specific elements are, especially in the professional development as we go forward.
So leadership development has not been a robust, organized set of strategies for how we do that. And so that's almost the case with every department. And so what better one to go into next than teacher learning, where Dr. Valentino will talk about how we need to focus on doing some foundational work, like having a core curriculum, for example.
Hi, everyone. So, our mission as it stands today in the Office of Teaching and Learning is to ensure that all students, particularly those that have historically been marginalized, to have access, equitable access to guaranteed and viable curriculum that across all disciplines that is rigorous, authentic, equitable, comprehensive, and sustainable. And so a different way of describing guaranteed and viable curriculum is that we provide a comprehensive instructional program for every student who walks through our door, meet them where they are, and move them to their maximum potential. In order to achieve that, there are 2 slides that identify key priorities for our work moving forward in 2018 and 19. And the first one is the completion and initial rollout of our core curriculum in language arts, math, and science. One of the learnings has been, and it connects back to the comments about capacity within the district and the supports that have been provided over time, that the initial rollout will need to be prioritized more carefully, because in my conversations with principals and with teachers when I go visit schools and in meetings that I've held with administrators, There's a belief that there's way too much coming at them at the same time, and we need to narrow the scope, prioritize, and deliver more carefully. And so one of the things that we're doing now is to revisiting what the original scope of that work was and resequence it so that it actually is manageable by schools. What that does then is we move to the second one, which is to focus on our professional development. If this is the expectation, how are we going to support our teachers, our site administrators, and ourselves to be able to deliver on that? And so, given the financial situation, one of the things that we're going to be leveraging more of is technology. Not so much in the short term because there will be a learning curve, but as we enhance our learning management systems, it will allow us to provide our teams and our staff with access to learning opportunities that are delivered 24/7 on any device, and they're designed to complement what we do when we meet with them face to face. And those are supports for teachers, administrators, and central staff. An area that has become, for me, a very important component of that work is the CT framework work. By participating in some of the meetings more recently around modernization and all of that, CTE has come up as a really important component that needs to have closer attention brought to it. Partly, Measure 98 as a funder of some of that work really requires that we revisit where CT stands now, and as some of those conversations in those meetings have happened, where is CT moving in the future, and how are we going to support that so that 20, 30 years from now, it's still viable even then. The assessment framework is another area that has also come up more recently. One, because as we roll out our core curriculum work, one of the things that we need is measures. We need measures of progress in our implementation, but also measures of impact that it's having on student growth and achievement. And there is a district assessment framework that was developed last year, and so now is about expanding its implementation so that, one, we have a way of calibrating across the entire district, and two, measuring and being able to compare how students are performing no matter where they are across the system. And so part of our core curriculum work is the integration of our formative and summative assessments inside of that work. As all of you know, PE and health has become part of the conversation this year because the state is requiring that we pay more attention to it and that we make agreements that we are going to implement with fidelity, whatever agreements we make. And so that has led to conversations around how to best support schools in their ability to implement, in particular, middle schools. And so we are engaging in those conversations around the PE and health requirements and how best to implement them and support schools in that.
So I want to ask about the core curriculum in language arts, math, and science, and in lieu of the conversation at the board meeting last Tuesday around the EL programs and wanting to calibrate. Does that include, and maybe we should mention if it does, alignment of ELD standards within the core curriculum?
Which is correct.
So it'd be great
Those
to have
standards
it
will be
listed.
integrated. Okay,
Yeah.
definitely.
Thank you.
Mhm.
There's a second slide on 18-19 priorities. I just want to give the reality check. This is not a year's worth of work.
Right.
Yeah.
It takes high-functioning organizations multiple years to roll this out.
If you don't call things out,
We're
then
still
you just need to see them.
pre-Common Core standard kind of catch-up right now, and so this is a pretty ambitious listing. Also, I don't want to give the board the impression, we're not presenting a strategic plan department by department. We're laying out at a high level what these chunks of work are going to be that we're managing resources for to try to make sure each of these end up with a very specific set of action steps that will allow these to move down the continuum of implementation.
And our goal is also to close those historic gaps, and so that's a really important piece. All I'm saying is that's work's going to happen, might as well call it out there.
And Dr. Valentino, under core curriculum, I noticed that it does not include social studies. And that's an area where I know we're all over the place.
Sure. So, as you know, the history social science standards are being finalized. as we speak.
Oh,
So they will become available over the summer. So over summer, there is a group, TOSIS, and some teachers who will be working in the development of a scope and sequence for that. How it will be implemented and rolled out will depend on bandwidth at schools, right? And so I didn't call it out as the initial work because of the areas that we are focusing on, but there is an appetite and an interest by some schools to actually begin to implement the core curriculum for history, social science, as well as for ethnic studies is the other one. And yes. So,
I'm sorry.
Yes.
You had a question back there?
Yes, I had a question. So it says about the PE and health. Is it required in high school that the students take the presidential testing, the annual presidential testing? Maybe that, because when I was in school, I was 2008 alum of Grant High School, but I went to middle school in the first part of my freshman year in Vancouver at Hudson's Bay. And it was required for us to participate in the presidential testing, which was a good morale for the students because you get awards, whichever ranking you get.
I don't know what it is in the state of Oregon. My understanding is that it's not.
I don't think it's required. I think some PE teachers include it in their program, but I think it's a choice.
The exciting thing, all of the other things are exciting too. This one's an exciting thing as well, is the integration of early learning into OTL, so that we can begin to look at it as a P12 continuum. So we're excited about that. And I've been talking to Antonio to sort of give some guidance and direction on about how to do that, since it has been sitting with him for a while. The other exciting one is the formalization of the UPS Arts Master Plan, which we are really excited about. When we want to leverage the commitment by the citizens of Portland to support the arts in Portland by agreeing to tax themselves. But more importantly, because I think it provides students with an expanded opportunity to enjoy their K-12 experience by expanding on that. Did you want to expand on that?
No, I think this is an area where we're very excited for visual and performing arts. I think there's already a lot of good work to build off of, considering the very limited staff at department. We're going to double
One
that.
super coach.
We're going to double it.
Incredible.
So what's exciting in our conversations with folks in the community who are very pro-arts education is an interest in helping to come together in an advisory to sort of refresh an arts education master plan and philanthropy that's very wanting to support with that. So we're excited about what the next level of arts education experiences can look like across our schools, because we want to make sure that that's also an area that we're building upon.
And also because it's been so under-resourced, it's been extremely inequitable across the district.
That's partly why I think the reaction to see what's included in core curriculum, because ours wasn't tested, it was, for years now, it was just, it's an extra. And so I get bristles when I see core curriculum and the testable things.
I don't think you have an administration that's driven by yelling and math testing as a driver. So all of it's important to us. You saw many content areas listed. To be honest, most school systems will take on one content area every couple of years and make the requisite investments in professional development and instructional materials, none of which our teachers have gotten in a while. And so it's trying to do multiple content areas at once and fold in at least some refreshed or purchased. Anyways, that's a whole other topic. But, a district this size would need to make $8 to $12 million a year of annual investment. That's not happened here.
And so the last two are, as part of our work, we really need to frame our work. And so an instructional framework or curricular framework would be in order to be able to formalize and articulate who we are as a department, what our focus areas are, how we define our priorities, and how we're going to measure our own progress over time. And so that would be done through an instructional framework. And our hope is that our instructional framework would inform the superintendent and board as they move towards the strategic plan. That aspect of the work of running a school district incorporates parts of the instructional framework.
So this is a very important point, because what there isn't evidence of is a clear articulation of the pedagogical models that would be used K through 12 across content areas and with diverse learners that we serve. And so how do we be really explicit about the universal design for learning? How do we be explicit about being culturally responsive in our strategies? How are we clear in the early grades about how we build foundational effective elements of literacy are built into our models all the way up through the grades? And so we need to define all of that, because in the absence of that clear guidance, folks are you see variability, and then therefore you see variability in outcomes, and you especially see it in the gaps with our subgroups of students. And so when you talk about ELD, Director Sparta Brown, is how do you talk about integrated ELD in all of our content areas at the same time that we talk about designated ELD for our ELs, and particularly in how we serve our newcomers.
So I'd be interested in this document to see your priorities and then how that crosswalks to the actual budget. So what line items that we talk about here would match to this budget document? If you look, if you look on the budget document has several lines of curriculum development with like no money in it. So it's like, I know it's got to be there somewhere else. So how does that match to the actual
We would
departmental?
love to be at that level of sophisticated budget book. I haven't found a budget book here in PPS where that was clear, but we would have to dive in a little deeper to the next level to be able to sort of show how we're setting aside resources to be able to do this work. It's been months of sort of trying to figure out what pools of resources are going to be enough to move each of these areas along, but I think it's a fair question.
So then conversely, if we're prioritizing things, what are things that we're deprioritizing? So, for example, just skimming through here, so like, our textbooks are going down, summer school, for elementary numbers are going down. It's like, what are the trade-offs for to prioritize this? If that's the right work, how much does that cost? And then what are we saying this year? We're going to either fund at a lower level or hold flat funded or not fund at all. So it's not that we get to 3 months into the next fiscal year and we're like, how come we're not doing X?
How does it affect the status quo?
Right. Well, to say like, what are the trade-offs of being intentional about, are we okay with spending half the money that we spent last year on textbooks and not having really any elementary school, summer school programs? It may be okay because we're buying this with the budget, but wanting to be able to think intentionally about knowing, like when we say yes to the budget, that what we're saying yes to.
So, as an example, can we go to the next one? If you look at textbook purchases, right? So the office budget is inclusive of personnel that includes site-based staffing, which is of the staffing that we have at $20 million, $15 million is site-based in ESL classrooms, et cetera. So that really lowers the number quite a bit. And so with whatever is left, this includes some central office staff, it includes the programs, professional development that is run, and also the textbook purchases. And it's by cost to each department. But if you look at textbook purchases, for example, one of the challenges that we're facing is the ability to have a full complement of resources in every subject area. Bridges in math, for example. The first version of those was prior to Common Core. So schools are working with math materials that are pre-Common Core. We don't have the millions of dollars necessary to purchase a new series. So what the district has been doing is refreshing and actually purchasing from other school districts that are eliminating theirs, and we're buying them.
We're buying discarded,
Yep.
out of
Discarding
print textbooks. for our
Awesome.
kids.
I'm not sure that was the answer I wanted to hear.
And actually, not only is Bridges not aligned with Common Core, but it was never aligned with
The
the
original
last
standards.
set of Oregon standards. When we went to standards in 1991, that is when we went to the first set of standards. Before we went to Common Core, PPS hasn't made that first step. So I think you've heard sometimes our superintendents say, in some things, we're like in the 90s. Well, we are. So I think that.
We've done more math adoptions than anything else over the last 20 years, I think.
That's scary to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another sobering fact is our science program at the elementary level. We used FOSS Kids,
Yeah.
the first version, 22 years ago. They were published. So Pluto was a planet.
There hasn't been much going on in the last.
Pluto is a planet.
You know,
It's
Yeah.
fun today.
I agree with you, but in this context, I'm trying to make a point. So those are examples of how the not having sufficient. The other thing is that we did, as part of cutting our budget, we cut 25 TOSAs. Those TOSAs were originally scheduled or marked to be working in schools as we implement the core curriculum in these 3 areas to serve as coaches and support systems. And well, they'll be gone. So one of the things that we will have to do differently is, instead of providing a direct coaching model, it'll be a consultancy model, right? Where you cluster schools or individuals together, and then a TOSA and we'll be working with them. So it does limit in the way that we're going to be able to support some of the work that we're rolling out.
It limits an itinerant teacher coming around to give in-person support. It doesn't, we do think about what are other formats for getting guidance out to teachers. What doesn't exist is an educator portal, but it gives that guidance, gives lesson plan suggestion, lays out that instructional materials. And so that's part of what our conversations are right now, is how do we open a school year where all of the emerging core curriculum across content areas is chunked out and online, so no teacher has to stay up on a Sunday night wondering what they're going to teach that week. And so all developed teachers for teachers.
And so the LMS, one of the things that I talked about earlier in professional development was how are we going to build out a more robust learning management. So that part's really exciting.
So is that, I mean, are we gonna, is the plan that we're gonna produce that? Or is there some other district that's already done this that we just,
Most urban districts are already.
we
So
borrow or?
we have been
Otherwise
vetting and
what?
actually are getting close to
We're actually going to show it at the
customizing.
teaching and learning
At
meeting.
teaching and learning, we will talk about the platform that we're going to be launching. It's a
You're all
learning
invited.
management system.
And Portland is working on one, Canvas. So some schools, some students, and some teachers have already been working on Canvas for a couple of years. The plan is to migrate towards a more robust learning management system, Pepper, which will do many of the things that the superintendent was describing.
So one of the reasons we vetted this particular platform is because we have to somehow leapfrog to get our teachers content, lessons, video clips, pedagogical guidance. We're purchasing that. And all of that's been archived and vetted, so teachers, can view and absorb all that at their leisure, and teams of teachers can look at those. And so
You will be amazed.
it's going to be definitely a whole different generation of what they've experienced. And
So we're not reinventing the wheel.
we don't have the capacity to reinvent it, nor do we, because there's good stuff out there.
Okay. That we look for the best. Okay. All right, now we'll move on to Brenda, Chief of Student Support Services.
Good afternoon. So
This is a newly formed Office of Student Support Services, so we just have a draft mission currently, which is to provide culturally responsive services, programs, and systems of supports to students and families, which contribute to not only the academic, but also the social and emotional success of all students. Because this is a newly formed office, we will be gathering stakeholders from many different departments to work on the mission, the vision, and the goals of this office. So our new office, what do we do? There are 6 departments in this office. The first one is athletics, that oversees all athletics 6th through 12th grade, and the management of the PIL, which is the Portland Interscholastic League. Sorry, I
You
had.
left an acronym.
No, I put it in, so this is, because I
Try not to be
actually,
so jargony.
sorry, I actually added language to every single one of
Oh,
those, so
sorry.
I
No, no, it's an
apologize.
You know what?
Maybe
I
the
took
last one.
the first set of slides that you sent us, I think.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No,
When
that's all
you've got a
right.
dozen people Google document presentation, version control.
Yeah, so sorry, I actually spelled them all out. So, so the other one is special education, which actually financially is the largest part of this office. And it is for all of the special ed programs, including Pioneer, Community Transition Program, any of our separate schools, private contracts, one-on-one nursing, paraeducators, all that good stuff. So that is special ed. Columbia Regional Program, that is the regional services that we have a contract to serve for students with low incidence disabilities. Columbia Regional Program provides services, support, and professional development for 22 school districts in our area, which include 4 counties and 3 DSDs. Enrollment and transfer, which you're all very familiar with. A new department, which is called our multi-tiered systems of support. We are actually pooling a number of our resources, and then this is one area that we're building on. We've made some priority decisions in where we're putting resources, and this is one area that is desperately needed. It will include response to intervention, which is RTI, our school climate team, restorative justice, positive behavior supports, or PBIS, and our student discipline team.
So can either of you explain in a nutshell why multi-tiered systems of support, or you, superintendent, is under your purview as opposed to in teaching and learning?
Well, the fact is, a multi-tier system of support, if you look at it from a response to intervention triangle, has 2 halves, an academic half and a behavioral half. And so all this is attempting to capture is that set of strategies and bodies of work strands that will be led under a newly launched department. We're talking about an entirely new office of chief here, bringing together student supports. And so all of these are aimed at getting a readiness to learn, so that the multi-tier system of supports that applies, or the academic RTI, the teaching and learning would articulate for core tier 1 curriculum, vetted, evidence-based, tier 2 curriculum and programs, which we need to talk about, and then those tier 3s. But the term can be applied to everything, right? You could be MTSS in your resource management. I applied it to school improvement across large districts, and how you look at it. All it's saying is that whatever the stuff is, you're differentiating levels of support and intervention, whether you're talking about schools or students, or in this case, how a department thinks about differentiating and support to schools. So how do you offer and build content knowledge in each of these areas, and have some mechanism for working with different school communities who are raising their understandings, but also may have specific crises, issues, incidents, where you need a team to be able to come in and support that school community.
Can I add just one other piece?
I just want to add something, thank you. It's, you know, they've been working those 2 pieces, especially PBIS and RTI, in separate places, and we have so needed to put everything together, so that's all I wanted to say.
So there's another sort of cross-department part I want to explain, and you'll see when I show OSP that there's part of MTSS in their core functions as well. So Our superintendent explained the behavior, classroom climate, and the academic side. But then if you also visualize, the bottom is the core, which will be an OTL, right? And then you start to identify what are tier 2 interventions and what are tier 3 interventions. So in terms of this office, she will oversee all of the behavior side from core to tier 2 interventions and tier 3 interventions. The RTI part will be a person who's anchored in her department, but will work really closely with Lisa's department on the academic core, so that they're working in partnership. So just to give you an example, if we're talking about elementary literacy, the director who's in charge of literacy and ensuring that we implement the core will also be working with this RTI person, so together they identify what are going to be our tier 2 and tier 3 supports. And then there's a component in OSP where area assistant superintendents and area directors will really be focusing on the CAP and the data and data literacy and providing reports. And together, across all 3 of those, we will be teaching, this is the way you look at what we're doing. First, what does implementation of the core look like, which will be anchored in OTL. While we're doing that, we're looking at individual student data to say, who are those students that are starting to fall through the crack because they don't have what they need? And we will have people anchored in both departments to look for those academic supports, and then the behavioral supports mostly sit in student services. So you can see we have to work together in order to get a whole system of MTSS to work right.
So we'll talk about this at the end of the presentation, how we begin to build that kind of system performance and progress monitoring. So it's hard to track it now. A, we don't have the system. 2, we don't have the metrics
Because
to be able to make
it's-
those decisions because we haven't talked about an assessment system or capacity rubrics for our student communities.
And we haven't had professional development or money for professional development to teach people a real RTI process where you actually watch the progress of every student, and those who are behind, you watch that progress every 6 weeks.
But and hopefully this is what you mean, we'll get back to. I mean, we've had a terrible chicken and egg thing for a long time where we don't resource the ability to get the student data that can help us have evidence-based practices.
And that's the assessment.
So we know that area is under-resourced a lot.
Along with that, I don't think that we've always utilized like the state resources, so I know that Brenda, I haven't met you yet, but I've heard that you have made some connections with the Oregon RTI, that was the state grant to do the work, so and they have a lot of experience in scaling up the district, so I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I just sent 4 people to the Oregon RTI conference last week, yes. Yeah, and I have reached out to David of Oregon RTI so that we can start to partner with them in regards to the response to intervention.
That might be something budget-wise that we need to think about.
The last department in the Office of Student Support Services is Student Success and Health. It oversees counselors, school psychs, our Section 504, student threat assessment, crisis response, our rapid response team, which is part of Article 6, or now newly called Article 9, trauma, our suicide prevention, mental health, drug and alcohol, nursing, and school-based health centers. So it's really all of those critical supports to help keep our kids in school.
So not everybody is familiar with our collective bargaining agreement articles, but this is, Brenda's referencing the fact that we made agreements to actually follow through and implement, plus enhance our ability to act quickly in crisis. So Brenda is leading a Tier 3 response team to put together a multidisciplinary set of people who are behaviorists, mental health providers, et cetera, who can come in and do that.
And that is another area, just like MTSS, where we have repurposed some resources in order to make sure that we're really looking at building district capacity at that Tier 3 area, providing teachers with some wellness opportunities, providing providing students and families with access to a school site that doesn't have to necessarily be special ed related. And then also offering more of those therapeutic intervention coaches so that we can support the system while we're building that capacity.
So question, and this is probably relates somewhat to the areas given your portfolio, but also just generally is, I'm doing a crosswalk to the budget book and trying to figure things out. And looking here, there's like zeroed out IEP writing, and I don't know if that should be somewhere else, but it went from 800,000 to zero, maybe it's a mistake. And then tag plan writing, it's still like $10,000. And I'm
Julie, sorry, what page is that?
page 7 at the bottom. Maybe I'm reading wrong, but.
Well, so I think I can answer your question.
Let me add this
Oh,
one.
okay.
So this last year, we were on the Division 22 requirements, we're out of compliance in 6 areas. So like, is this a budget that will get us back in compliance with the, does it support the services and the work that needs to be done in order to have us in compliance?
Yes. So the $800,000 for the IEP writing, I believe, just moved from one budget to another. It was under the HR department, and when we looked at initial.
We find all kinds of things.
Yeah, so what we did is, we decided in a number of areas in HR to actually put the funding where it's supposed to go. So IEP writing makes sense, that it would fall under the special education department.
And we may,
No, so is
we
that?
may need to do some fine tuning to some of these accounts, because some of them got kind of bundled together, and we need to break them out as part of the final budget process.
Yeah, or if it's moved somewhere, to be clear about that, because if you look through here, it's like, oh, they're like not really doing anything new on tag, which we've been applying for a long time, and then just IEP writing, it's like, if it's somewhere else, maybe it's go to line whatever where that is, so it's only just to do that.
And I was gonna wait for Brenda to finish before I came back around to, I don't see tag called out anywhere here.
Yeah, and we will, to Molly's point, and I know Zach has something to add too, we do need to do that cleanup, make sure that's all transparent in that budget book as well. We need to make sure all this.
So in terms of initiatives as well as objectives, that's
So
Did you have some add, Zach, on the?
Can I just speak to both of those things real quick? Specifically on IEP writing, that was housed in our budget and legal requirements department, which we're basically moving out to the schools. It's not as clear in this book because there's 30 different ways we can, present this, and all of them are differently, but it is being moved from a budget and finance piece where it was housed as a sort of incidental but necessary cost of the district to the content-based department where it will be housed. You are correct that there is still, because we've done so much reorganization, some of those account lines, which are accounted for in the bottom line, may need some clarity, and I think collecting those pieces that we have specific questions about, so that we can go into that line item by line item piece that is unintelligible to everybody but the budget department, say this $500,000 moved demonstrably from here to here, so that we have the plain language answers that you need that are also compliant with the other pieces that we're doing for this. So that is information that's information that we have in a format that's too large to share with anybody else, but we can definitely catalog those and crosswalk that to the actual budget.
So I did want to answer your question about the Division 22 standards, though. We're out of compliance in a number of areas that I'm aware of, and we have addressed those issues, like the suicide prevention training for staff and for students in the drug and alcohol awareness. That's going to be addressed. So the areas that I know about, we have made plans to make sure that we're in compliance with the Division 22 standards.
My suggestion, could we have a separate piece of paper that looks at the Division 22 and then whatever has been done to address the concerns?
If there's a budgetary impact, yeah, or resources needed.
And thank you, that answer goes a long way towards answering the question. So on, say, special ed and MTSS and some things around student success, there's a component of professional development that's going to need to go into those. Are you the one left holding the baby, or is it Dr. Valentino? For professional
I think that's an answer.
So,
Congratulations.
Exactly. So we will be responsible for the content of the professional development. It's going to go under OTL for professional development learning for them to coordinate the district's PD plan. But each department, because of our expertise, will be responsible for providing that and getting that to.
So here's my observation, is every department was kind of just throwing out PD opportunities. They weren't coherently organized into one universal PD catalog that had been vetted. And so now this way, every department chief will be able to come together as a multidisciplinary department group to actually publish a catalog of those opportunities that the district is sponsoring, or some that might be available through some other format.
Closely related, at least in my mind. Accessing resources for counselors and school sites like Metropolitan Family Services, is that going through your department, going through you?
For like mental health services?
Mental health services, yeah.
Yes,
exactly.
yes,
Oh,
all
that is,
mental health
okay,
services.
great.
Yeah, Cascadia, we currently contract with Cascadia, Multnomah County, Morrison Center, and Western Psych.
Okay.
So anyway, so I wanted to tell you these are, oh, sorry.
So page 7, start time medical reimbursement, zeroed out.
Oh, I don't have that book.
Okay, so are we, it doesn't matter, I can ask that question without numbers. So, as I understand it, we are currently not doing Medicaid for anything.
Correct.
Okay, are we planning to develop that capacity at some point? And do we
No,
have any?
I don't know the answer to that.
Jim was looking into that and trying to understand what the, the pros and cons and think it was kind of scoping like, single-digit $1 million was kind of the last number he came across.
I would be surprised if it's that low.
I would also.
Okay.
There's pros and cons to billing for Medicaid.
Right.
It's also a workload issue. So you would have to make sure that you're building that into your budget if you're actually going to do billable services.
That's my question.
Yeah. So you would have to do that. You'd have to have some sort of FTE allocation to monitor the Medicaid billing.
Right.
And then how you're providing the reimbursements back, just like they were talking about, like with high-cost disability.
Correct.
So it's very, it's similar. High-cost disability is a lot easier to do than Medicaid billing, but, so it's something we definitely need to talk about because it would be of great benefit to PPS because we have a number of students Medicaid eligible, but there are a lot of additional complexities in regards to workload, but specifically with counselors and school sites.
And we do some of that. So MESD, so some of our staff actually does some of that certification today through MESD. And it is an extra workload challenge.
Yes.
So,
And again, I think we tried this about a decade ago, and it was broke even.
okay, but a couple things have changed.
Yes.
OSBA is working on Medicaid, and ODE is working on Medicaid. So, it would,
I'm not sure they've fixed everything we needed them to. Most districts, except a district as big as PPS, have just let go of it because we were spending more money tracking it than we were actually getting. It wasn't cost effective for us. Now, in PPS, it might be. So I think we want to see what happens with the legislature. I know that Jim is doing a little research, and he and I didn't touch base again on that, but I have been checking with other districts and what they were doing, and most of the people I knew that had been using it and doing it weren't doing it anymore. So we'll see what those changes, if they help us.
Portland was doing it up until about 3 years ago. It was taking in the central office 2 and about a third FTE to handle it, but off of that approximately $230,000 investment, we were bringing in about $3 million a year. So very much worth it.
Absolutely.
And the workload issues out in the schools I know that we got those solved,
Yep.
and then we stopped doing it.
Figure it out.
As soon as we got them solved, we quit. And I can
think
talk
if
about the
there's an
specific
opportunity
reasons,
there,
but I'm not
the
going to.
cost benefit
Yeah.
of tracking it all could pay off in the way of additional resources, then we'll pursue it. Particularly,
Good.
that's something we'll have to dive into.
Brian, can we go to the next?
So I guess the question at hand, though, is do we need to build any of that into this budget? Or are we going to spend some time exploring and then?
There is a small amount built into this budget right now. I don't remember the actual number, but we have on the revenue side, we built in a small amount of revenue to this.
So there's probably a list of things where, as we kind of learn a little bit more over the coming weeks, we may unravel something we want to sort of augment any of the departments on so we can pursue it. This makes sense as one of them, we may do that.
I'm sorry, before, Gabrielle, did you have your hand up? No, okay.
Oh, it was already answered.
Okay.
So my priorities for the remainder of this year is to, of course, post for positions, hire staff, and for our professional development, get that to OTL, and then work on our alignment of services. Establish budget reporting mechanisms and a consistent review process that has not been happening in the past, and that will happen now.
Do you mean both for internal processes as well as outside contracts?
For me, with my department senior directors and directors, so that we're, so that
Your
I'm
departmental budget.
finalize budget, contractual agreements, organize and facilitate the vision and mission work that I talked about, review contracts in all of our departments to look for efficiencies in monitoring components. One example is our Resolutions Northwest contract. Currently, we are using that to provide some contracted services. We're going to bring those services in-house. We have some highly skilled staff that we're going to be able to grow that department. And then really what we need to look at is that adult mediation piece. And Resolution Northwest has a branch of that who is excellent in what they do. And so we really want to use them to augment and support the needs that we have in DPS. But bringing people in for our own staff and our own PD will be more beneficial for our students and our needs. The last.
Just when you're making the hires, that you're going to be looking across cultures and languages, because I know about some of the glitches with our non-English speaking families in the system. Yes, I agree.
Last one is to just establish those meeting structures and processes when you are developing a new office, just making sure that that runs smoothly. The next one is budget.
I'm sorry, but Julie, I think you raised a wonderful question. Dan, where is translation services? Is it spread to the different departments, or is it one specific
Right now it's in
concentrated?
communications.
What
Okay.
about school-based translations? Because my understanding that used to be like a school-based responsibility, but they didn't get necessarily extra money.
So I believe it's all in communications.
Okay.
I think it was brought into.
It all sits in
Yeah.
communications, but a lot of it is spent by the schools directly. We have contractors, it's like $300,000 spend up contract that the schools mainly use, that just house.
So it used to be the schools had to pay to use some of their consolidated budget to pay for it,
Yeah.
but now now it's all centralized.
So, for example, families that wanted IEPs translated, if they came out of the school budget, they weren't likely to want to do that. So connecting with interpreter translators around particularly training a cadre of interpreters with that very specific content.
So we don't ever want that to be an issue, so if we're noting these questions, when we get to the communication budget in another session, we'll make sure to speak to it.
Okay.
And we're so early in our tenure here, Brenda and I have just begun the discussions around where should it live, how do we best collaborate and coordinate so that we're meeting all the needs and being as efficient as possible, and we have yet to have those conversations.
So the bullet point, organize and facilitate vision mission work with stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders?
So the stakeholders are going to be a variety of people, staff from multiple departments. I would like to have some family input, student input, administration input. So it's a variety of stakeholders to make sure, because this is the Office of Student Support Services. So I think that we need to really make sure that our vision, mission, and goal work reflects the needs of the community.
And how it intersects with community-based organizations.
Yes.
So there are a number of pre-existing committees that you could maybe usefully connect with. But I think you also want to do some thinking, because this is something that we have not been good at. We pretend to be good at it, but we're not good at it. Moses, did you want to?
Okay, so we'll move on to the budget. Student support services is 12.9% of the general fund budget. We are 84 million of the 650. The largest percentage of the office budget is special education services, which is almost 87%, which is about 11% of the general fund. Athletics for the office budget is 7.7%. I did want to talk a little bit about that. The athletics department has been under budgeted for multiple years, and so we have righted that ship. So we have ensured that the budget reflects the actual spending over an average of, Ryan, did you average it over 2 years or 3 years?
Over 3 years.
3 years. I think it was a 3-year average. And so what we did is we righted the ship there, which was needed.
Can I ask just on that, what was decided on the much disputed gate fees? Are those staying with the schools, or they, or same with the athletic department, or they just go into the general fund?
I think what we decided is they just going into the general fund, but what we're going to do, exactly, adequately fund the athletic department the way it's supposed to be.
And coincidentally, I think those amounts were about the same.
They were almost the
Yeah.
same. Yeah, they were probably within, I think, like 8,000.
Hence the discrepancy.
Okay, so,
So Ryan, does this go back to when Marshall Haskins did his presentation to the CBRC? This will write that, all that money that he was having to go in?
Well, not quite. What would happen is Marshall would overspend every year. He had a budget that was artificially low, he would overspend. So really what this does, this allows him to continue to offer the current level of service without overspending his budget. So it trues up really what it does, it trues up the budget.
He will still use his foundation to raise money that we can't provide.
Right, but
Period.
it's a more accurate foundation, so I think now, you have a debate about whether or not that's the right place to invest or not, but at least it gives you a good foundation.
I mean, to your point, it's also worth talking about what are the core services that we expect to be delivered there, because there is supplemental funding for what I think many could argue are core services. Like, for example, when we started the whole middle school athletic programs, there was no additional resource for that.
so is this still relying on student fees?
No, this budget does not rely on student fees. The student fees go into the general fund, and then we're balancing the athletic budget as
okay.
per the 3-year average.
So
I think what you're asking is there participation fees? Is that
Yeah,
what
are
it is?
there participation?
Yeah, the fees will
Yes.
stay the same. We didn't increase fees.
And because we're in a budget cut mode, we had looked at making reductions to athletics. When we found that we were not even funding to the level he was spending, making a reduction, we couldn't do that. We had to say, first we have to right the ship, then we have to look deeper at everything and say, what are we going to offer or not? Because to cut those, we're actually cutting services to kids. We were actually going to cut out certain sports programs, and the kids that it will impact are the kids who are historically underserved. So of course, we don't want to do that. It's always a challenge because, yeah, it's just never funded to the level that we want to have kids participate.
So the next slide is plan for efficiencies budgetarily. I do want to look at how we can make our office more efficient. So we will prioritize mandatory services in a legally compliant manner. That includes all of our OARs and our title, our Division 22 standards. And because there are a number of things that haven't been monitored on a regular basis, I am putting in a time to review on a monthly basis, non-personnel budgets for every single month in every single department. That's what we will start doing. Review contracts critically in order to monitor for the effectiveness of the contracted services. A lot of times we're continuing to offer contracts over and over again, and we're really not monitoring for that effectiveness. So we really need to look at what our needs are and then ask for the services that we need instead of the other way around.
Are we including in the contracts some kind of evaluation mechanism, like some kind of metrics or something?
That's what I would want,
Isn't that the
is
contract
to
include
make sure
some
that.
evaluation component?
Yeah.
Yes, but they're not standardized.
Right. So our intention is for new leadership to be doing that, having a multi-department panel to review their impact of that investment.
And then the last piece of that, to make that transparent to the board when the board has to consider renewing those contracts.
Correct.
And then we already talked about the restructuring of the school climate team to align with NTSS implementation, so I won't go through that. Again, next steps is to just communicate then the mission and vision once we develop that, align our systems and frameworks with OSP and OTL so that we have a seamless system of support, which we talked about as an example with RTI. To implement a comprehensive multi-tiered system of support and roll it out along with the, what it was used to be called as the rapid response team, which is now the district tier 3 collaboration team. Research and implement a drug and alcohol and a dual diagnosis continuum of care plan. Implement our student threat assessment. We have started that this year. We have implemented a level student threat assessment in all of our high schools. We've also implemented a weekly level 2 threat assessment team, which is community-based, and then we will roll it out to our middle schools, our alt programs, and our elementaries next year.
You mean it's community-based, so centered where?
We have it at the, I think it's the North Precinct, of Portland Police Bureau, and then we go there, I think twice a month, and then we go somewhere, so it was space issues getting this up late in the year. And so there are a number of different participating agencies. The police department with the juvenile justice, DHS, juvenile corrections, ESD, Multnomah County Health Department, mental health, and then a number of our different departments, like our reconnection services, special ed, trauma and support, crisis recovery. So it's a number of different components. We've modeled this after Salem Kaiser's level threat assessment. We went through a number of months of training with them. They came up and helped us train. And so we're modeling our level 2 team after the Salem Kaiser model, which is called the Mid-Valley threat assessment process. So,
And they gave it to us for free.
they gave it to us for free because they're really kind of. And then the last thing is to just learn more about my new departments in order to plan for the future. Yes. So that's it.
I feel like you're saying bullet point over this.
I know.
Yes.
Copy paste.
So, so 2 questions. Who owns parent engagement? Or how do you see that running across a number of threads? There's an academic component in terms of how do we engage parents in supporting your child's academic success that's directly into curriculum materials. and how we communicate at home, and then there's.
So we have a slide coming up that's going to explain a little bit about that.
Oh, stop. And then tag is my other question, again, if you said, when it's appropriate, yeah.
So I made some changes to Antonio's slides, so I'm going to read them, since we didn't have time to match up.
Although, also, piggybacking on Scott's, where do libraries come in?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Very interested in libraries.
All right, so in the Office of School Performance, Antonio is the Assistant Superintendent, oversees that work, but I didn't give him the slides, so I fixed them for him.
Actually, I made some notes too.
You did too? Okay.
This is the live one, this is the most recent one, so they may not be fully in sync with page one, this is one off.
No. Okay.
This is on the top.
Okay, so I'll read from there.
This one should be fresh.
So the mission in Office of School Performance is that the office develops, supports, and supervises schools by providing professional development, coaching, and differentiated supports in order for principals to become strong instructional leaders. That's the key, is really attending to those principals. If you look at the research, teachers make a difference with individual kids and classrooms, but the only way you get a high-performing school is through that building leader who has to be an instructional leader, who's willing to push those changes, knows how to support people, and so on. These leaders model and support teachers in, these leaders model and support teachers in utilizing high-leverage, culturally relevant, and rigorous instructional strategies. So the strategies will be identified, and the professional development would come from OTL as well as the content professional development, but it's really the work of the Office of School Performance to ensure that we are doing an adequate job of developing this book. So it's just really a close working relationship between the Office of School Performance and OTL as well as student support services. So the priorities are to work in collaboration, I just said that, the other two offices to implement the instructional program and to access the wraparound services. To ensure a strong principal and vice principal in every building who is well matched to the school community.
Hey, that was one of our strategic priorities. You recycled it.
And to provide high-quality feedback that deepens skills and improves leadership performance, resulting in increased student learning. The point of everything we do is to improve instruction for students. So this is just showing you a couple of models to the question about how many area assistant superintendents and area directors we have. One model is showing that there would be a cohort that is supported by an area assistant sup and an area director. The other side shows, okay, maybe we don't find enough people who are really ready for that assistant superintendent, so we'll use the ones that we do have, and then partner those area directors under them for maybe partnering a couple of cohorts. The most important thing here is that we actually get a structure where people have the knowledge and skills they need at every level so that people see the pathway, but they also get the support and the training they need to be prepared for each level. The future core functions and services, and this is one kind of still under development, is to hire and develop instructional leaders. The services are to provide that leadership development opportunities for building administrators. And the impact is that you'll have strong instructional leaders that lead the instructional work in schools that raise student achievement and eliminate those disparity gaps. Disparities and by subgroups that we named before. To also support schools. So one is the instructional leader, but then supporting schools. All kinds of things go on in those schools. So providing the professional development, coaching, and differentiated support, and to be the bridge to the other departments. If there's something needed through HR or budget or whatever that might be, that they are the ones on the ground those area directors and assistant superintendents working closely with the principals to find out what they need and then come work with the other departments. And then school accountability is through the CAP and the MTSS model. So here's that other link to MTSS in OSP. So OSP provides the reports, some assessment literacy training, which originally would come from OTL, but we'll continue that training over and over again as people need that to help them be supported in that way. Assessment literacy training, so that's not just literacy training. And the impact is that we raise student achievement for all students and eliminate those achievement disparities is what it should say. And then another core function is the induction, the support, the retention, and growth. Services building pathways for success for all of those leaders. And the impact for us there is then we have a strong pool of ready leaders to take those next higher positions.
So you're going to hear overlap in the coming weeks about how the Reimagined Talent and Culture Department will do some overlapping work on talent.
Definitely have some aligned goals and functions there. So the school support budget is 5.5% of the general fund, 35.5 million of the 650 million. And you can see that where most of that money goes is to charters and to our multi-pathways to, multiple pathways to graduation. And so I think we have a couple of follow-up slides. You can read all of those other numbers yourself, but the biggest ones I'm going to highlight right now. So,
Can you go back for just one second? So I guess we have. Sorry.
So the Office of School Performance and Senior Leadership, that is where we are budgeting for the area directors and the area assistant superintendents and the chief. Correct, right?
That is correct, yes.
So you made a comment about, I guess, the budget, which is a large budget for multiple pathways. Don't they have a lot of grant work too, so it's hard, I guess we don't know.
This is just the general fund part.
Okay.
So we parse that out,
So,
so.
okay. Out there, budget.
So I just wanted to call out those two suits to make sure we all had a shared understanding of what happens there. So charter school.
One question.
Yes.
At some point, I think it would be good to know what percentage of our students are engaged in multiple pathways, to be able
Actually, I'm
to
gonna show you
compare
that
that really.
next slide. Awesome. So just to bring us all up to the same understanding of the charter schools, we serve nearly 2,100 K-12 students annually in innovative programs with specific educational philosophies and delivery models that offer additional options for students and families within the public school system. Charter schools enter into a contract with PBS for sponsorship, and they maintain a high level of autonomy in exchange for increased accountability. The charter schools are funded through the state school funds that are passed through PPS, general funds, state school fund allocation using a mathematical formula depending on the grade level of the student. In addition, PPS includes charter schools in our equity allocations, and this is a PPS decision, calculating the FTE that those schools will be entitled to, converting the FTE to dollars, and including it in their allocation. And that was a new learning for me.
Yeah, well, we just did that a year ago.
Okay. Yeah, and it's in line with our equity goals. Because those 2,100 students are our students, right? In the school year 18-19, that pass-through is estimated at $14.4 million. Good question.
Pass-through meaning what?
The whole
equity?
amount. No, not just equity. The
State.
whole amount that goes
State
from the
allocation.
state to the charter schools.
Well, they're passed through because they're not enrolled in one of our schools.
Right.
in the traditional portfolio, so.
And do we pass through 80% or 85%?
I believe 85.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, so that's the.
We should probably add that to that.
Yep, yep.
We can let our resident expert back there.
It's-
Oh, I didn't see you back there.
That's all right. It is 85 at K-8 and 95 at high school. And what about? And that's outlined by the state. So we do exactly what the state requires as far as the minimum path.
And what is it for our contracted alternative schools?
For our contracted alternative schools, again, it's determined by statute, and it's 80% of NOE, net operating expense. And that changes, we get that figure from our budget office every year, of what the net operating expense is to the cost per pupil and for a kiddo in BPS. And then CBOs get 80% of that.
So the state mandates the 85% and the 95%?
Yeah. We do the minimum. Charter schools around the state have asked the state to raise that higher. Charter schools in our district have historically come and asked leadership for a higher rate. And the district has always provided we follow the state guidelines of what we are required to pass through.
They've asked for a district supplement.
Correct.
I think we had some this year that asked for them, but we just haven't approved the standard amount, right, Paul?
But now we're adding in equity funds.
Correct.
So when you add in equity funds, what's the, I mean,
I want to say equity was $300,000 or so, is that about right? Across all the charters?
I believe it's across all the charters. It was because we
8% of the total.
Yeah, we applied a specific calculation based on population. This population warranted a lower equity allocation to other
Because many of our charters do not have diversity.
right. Close to something.
Close to that.
And a lot of the charter schools would use the dollars to attract a more diverse pool of candidates as well. So it's pretty specific.
Okay.
We have a question.
Is there a certain amount of students that can be under one principal? No, there's like no cap for how many students can be under one principal. Okay.
Whoever shows up at the door.
What we do have is
Staff
sort of a logic model for staffing administrators at a school. So if you reach a certain threshold, we'll kick in an assistant principal so that there's enough administrative capacity.
But not in charter schools.
Oh, not in charters.
But not in charter. Okay.
Was that your question, charter
Yes,
schools?
I got, what was more like a general
Oh, okay.
question, but I'm getting it, just gotta get information here and there.
Depending on the level of school and the number of students, then they would be allocated a certain amount of administration.
Okay, yeah, because it was mentioned about the question came because it was mentioned about principals, but on the chart, it doesn't show where the principals would lie on this chart. And then I know there's a previous chart where it said the area of assistant superintendent. So I'm trying to like get a visual of both charts put together and see where the principals would lie and how students would have their support from the principals, because you mentioned the leadership that the principals have to withhold for their teachers just alone. So just trying to find the balance of both charts together.
What might be helpful is to share with you information we covered in a previous meeting when we did school staffing that included school level administrators. Today we're talking about central office administrators. That's why we're not going into detail about it as we have in the past, but we can share that information.
Oh, no, I got you. I'm good to go. Thank you.
Karina, do you want to do this one? No, okay. So multiple pathways, just to give you a little background, multiple pathways serves more than 10,000 K-12 students annually, often our most vulnerable students, by providing schools and all district-wide credit recovery during the day in all comprehensive focus and alternative schools, as well as in the evening and summer. So multiple pathways to graduation works with parenting students and their children, age 6 weeks, and students pre-K through 12. Also includes our community-based alternative schools who serve over 2,000 students who had disengaged from comprehensive high school programs. And Karina gave a really great presentation at one of our teaching and learning committee meetings. All of the multiple pathways to graduation schools and programs provide direct services to students and directly impact our high school graduation and completion rate. So when we were looking at where do we reduce the budget and the Office of School Performance, you saw that the majority of it goes to charter schools, which we don't have a choice on that. the next biggest bucket goes to this work, and it almost all goes out to kids directly. So if we were to cut any resource for them, it would have actually cut the number of kids we could serve.
And
they're
I think
our
it's
most vulnerable.
amazing what they serve and what they have. I mean,
Yeah.
it really is a highlight. It's wonderful.
It is where we're getting the increases in our
Right.
graduation rate.
And it should be noted that the equity funds don't go to our contracted alternative schools, which
True? Interesting.
the equity fund, the contracted alternative schools don't get the equity funds, but our charter schools do, so
Change that.
in my mind, that's something we need to
Yeah.
fix.
Well, I think the bigger question is, why is it 20% of the student population is choosing an alternative from
Right.
our traditional model
Right.
funding schools? So
Right.
I think that's
It's
a
very
question
high
worth diving
compared
into.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I've never heard of that
Yeah.
level. So there's something about our offerings and our programming. We should pay attention to some of those practices and learnings so that we're doing that across more of our schools, so our kids don't feel like they have to choose a different alternative.
You could probably link it straight to the lack of MTSS.
There's a few places
And
to
core
look at it, too.
curriculum and professional.
So-
Always we support teachers.
There's likely something about the demographic that's appearing in these programs that somehow are not being served
This
elsewhere.
is one of our canaries.
Right. So that's a big,
Can I,
On that huge homeless component, and clearly not doing a good job supporting those kids in our environment.
many of these programs are. So how are we learning from those promising practices?
Which actually, that's part of what Karina.
I just want to say one thing. One piece of data I think is really fascinating is when we did late joiner studies. One of the last things Sarah Singer did before she left, 18% of our high school community joins PPS after ninth grade. So I think one of the things, Director Anthony just talked about mobility, and so I think there's a, just broadening that conversation around how to, just like what our superintendent said, how are we really reaching all of our students?
So 1 in 5 students did not go through our K-8
They
program?
came in, they might have moved, they may have gone early and left, but then they come back, or they come back after ninth grade. They don't start high school with us.
Wow, interesting.
Would that be in the middle or after ninth grade?
We call them late joiners, so when we looked at our high school students, because we were trying to kind of practice not around how do we do better by our high school students. And one of the pieces of information that was really telling was 18% of our high school students join our high school programming after ninth grade. So it's just interesting when we talk about,
So that is interesting to bring up in this context, so they don't stick.
well, and just like what Director Anthony said about homelessness and mobility and poverty.
At one point, we had this stunning map of our high schools that showed random percentages, not random, but how many percentages, what percentage X of the high school's population had been at number Y schools before reaching that high school. And Madison was at about 8 for like 30% of the kids. And Roosevelt was over 12 for a staggering percentage. It's like half the school had been at a different school every year before they got to got to Roosevelt. Really stunning. We should
Our team,
recirculate that.
Our team is highlighting some pretty big priority areas that require implementation, but this, I gotta say, is one of the most astounding areas because it says something about our school system.
And I want to say thank you to Karina and everybody in this program that is literally saving kids and giving them a future.
And we're losing, it's getting a bit far field, but we're losing our middle school option here, contracted alternative school, and I don't know what we're doing about where those kids are going and how we're going to assure their success.
We can follow up. We're working our best, we're doing our best.
can I ask a question about, So going back to this chart about what's in this department, high school programs. So I'm kind of, I guess I'm struggling just a little bit to figure out what determines when something is in OTL and when it's in OSP. And I kind of get it, but I'm not quite sure. So
I'm not actually sure what's in that number right there, high school programs, is that?
Is that alliance or is that stuff, student supports that are happening in the?
We'll look into that. Yeah, exactly the split on that, and we'll, MC can still hear, but yeah, we'll take that.
And so this is all, so kind of the logic is that
Where there are students that we're directly supervising, they're in the office of school, and where there are programmatic elements, then generally the other two divisions will take on, generally. You're wondering about how we're organizing?
yeah, I'm trying to figure out the logic of it, and it's escaping me a little bit.
Like a case could be made for either for athletics, that's school-based programs, coaches.
But the other thing is, I mean, so my understanding of OSP has been that its primary function, and I may be very wrong, but I thought the primary function was supporting principals, like school leadership.
Its primary function should be to ensure the conditions in school communities are permitting continuous improvement, and that includes not just the principal in my mind.
Or any of those programs that are directly serving kids towards graduation.
Okay.
So
So
the
where are
research
you
is really
thinking it should
clear.
go?
If you're going to move schools at scale, you're not just working with one individual at each site.
Okay. Okay, so I should just, maybe I should preface this, or it's no longer a preface. The difference between OTL and OSP has always been very fuzzy to me. So if we.
So the way I think about it is it's all the people versus the content and the assessments, curriculum, for the most part, would be in OTL, but all the leaders supporting the teachers, supporting, so when we look at staffing and all of that, you've got these leaders that are providing the support in terms of management as well as instructional leadership, but they can't, and actually Antonio spoke really well to that. You should say what we haven't had.
One is the what, and that is the instructional model. And that's our OTL in terms of the knowledge. The how is implemented is really the OSP part, right? How do we make sure that it is really happening? How do we make sure that there is, that in the classroom is being visible in terms of what they prepare? Is how do we make sure that whatever is prepared in the instructional side, in the pedagogy side, that in the schools is implemented. So that's how I see it.
But there's such a close relationship, or should be. And what you shared this morning was there hasn't, in the past, there wasn't that relationship, and there wasn't the resource in OSP. So they were working very separate. And you can see what we're trying to do is really kind of overlap these to say we all have a responsibility around the instructional core, which is why it lives in my vision and priorities, because that is what I'll have to continually ensure is that we are doing that work together.
It's problematic if you envision them separately.
Yeah.
It's idiosyncratic then. It's a three-headed body of support for our school leaders, city and the deputy. So we have to change that paradigm, and by making sure these departments are working very closely together around the table, talking about the same set of schools, looking at the same capacity and system performance data, we can actually have that level of conversation. So,
And our friends at Pioneer and Access are two good examples of how that that divide can be problematic or has been problematic.
So why is Indian Ed on here? It reminds me of migrant ed, there's separate funding for that. And so how does that fit under OSP?
I think it's been because Karina, are you?
I don't supervise
Oh, you don't?
Indian education, but this is, we have, Indian education is under title funding,
That's
but
what
we
it is.
provide, we supplement with some general fund dollars to provide outreach at the schools.
These are categorical programs.
Yeah, it's kind of like migrants, so I don't see migrant on here, it's like, shouldn't they be together somewhere?
So the federal programs have been spread all over the place as part of the challenge. OSP had title, and my understanding is historically, kind of nobody was rushing that one, so Antonio did something about that, and so he had it in his department. We have now moved all the funded programs, grant-funded programs to OTLs, so it has that instructional piece. And Antonio thought that was what we needed to do, but he was holding on to it before because we really didn't have it all together, but.
So will Indian Ed move?
Indian Ed is a funded program.
So you will move?
So we probably should move that
Okay.
budget.
That's quick, more clear.
And see, this is what we keep finding out every day. Why is this over here, right? So I think we just didn't ask ourselves that question. So good question, good catch.
And I think that is important. It is important to know that in the past, there were 3 assistant superintendents, right? In funded programs, athletics, that was under one of the assistant superintendents, that was Harriet Adair. And in last year, when that position was eliminated, then it was left OSP and OTL. So we absorbed some of those last year.
Right.
So that's why you have this kind of lack of cohesiveness, because before it was 3 assistant supers.
Got it, okay.
So Rita's question, Ryan, is we need to get a clear understanding of that high school programs. We don't know
Yep.
why that little bit is there.
Yeah, and Daniel and I were talking about that. I think we'll look into it. Yeah, we have
Yeah.
just make sure.
We'll come back.
Yeah. Yep, you got it.
Again, another good catch that we can explain.
There's new artwork on the second edition.
Something to look forward to. Okay, shall we do my last slide? Yep. Dave?
I'm not quite sure where this fits, but I want to make sure it gets asked. You have under OTL a focus or a premise on assessment framework, and under this group, it talks about school performance. SBAC is a school level indicator. Is it under this group?
No, I'll be talking about that at the end of this presentation. Yeah.
Okay.
Assessment insofar as it's informative instruction, but performance and progress monitoring we need to sit independently as check and balance.
Okay.
Okay, I want to do a time check, again, 10 minutes. Did you have a question?
Yeah, just one question, and I think all my questions will be answered. So just to go back with the mental health and trauma, you had mentioned was Medicaid paying for that? Like for instance, if Grant, there was a clinic, but sounding like that Portland Public Schools is paying for that clinic instead of Medicaid. So if Medicaid was to pay for that clinic, and she had also mentioned having therapists to speak with, my high school counselor was had her PhD, so she was able to treat, on multiple levels. But if she was to say, have hours in the clinic and Medicaid started paying for that, then that should be able to remove some, balance out some funds to go back into the general budget, because then Medicaid would be paying for her services. So, just a suggestion. Yeah.
Okay, so you can probably tell by this presentation, going at a reduced budget was really difficult when what we're trying to do is beef this up. And because we cannot cut special education and don't want to, but also because of maintenance of effort. And then when we look on the Office of School Performance, the biggest chunks were the multiple pathways to graduation, the charter schools, which we don't get a choice over, and the senior directors, which were pretty thinly staffed. In fact, they only have a budget themselves of $25,000 to support all the schools in their cluster. So there wasn't anything we wanted to reduce there. So the area that we were looking for efficiencies, one of the things we've learned is that we have what we call SSAs or community agents in multiple divisions in the district. And so we've identified that there's 21 FTE, student success advocates, and 9.5 FTE in community agents. And when we talk to people about what they're doing, there's not a clean line. So what we have decided is the project manager in student support, one of the projects they're going to do is meet with all of these different community agents and see if we can get a framework and an understanding of what are they all doing, first of all, what do we really need, what are they all doing, what should be the right structure, and then that will be in student support services once we figure that all out. However, for the budget reduction piece, the only thing we could find that we could reduce to take a fair, or at least a little bit, out of OSP was to reduce those community agents in the Office of School Performance. So you'll see there was, pardon me? School and Family Partnerships. So what we also find is they're called different things in each of these departments. So that's what they were called in OSP. We reduced those four, partly because we needed to make a reduction somewhere, and we know that those tasks are getting replicated in other people.
So did those four have any particular second language talents that are important for the school?
So we have the multiple languages represented in all of those as well.
Okay, so we're just making sure that we continue to have the represented languages.
So I don't want to say we're not losing anything, because that would say there wasn't value. There was value in what people are doing, but we just think we don't have any coordination. So that's the first thing we need to do, and then we can see, you know, what are we serving, and are we doing it well, and where are the gaps?
So I guess my question more specifically was, you know, we say we support 5 languages just to ensure that we still, somewhere in these people, have those languages covered.
Yeah, well, we know we have them covered in communications, translation services, and
We would likely all share the goal of saying we want one coherent family and community engagement unit that is able to support multiple programs and departments. But that unit has to be diverse, multilingual, that's working closely with communications. And so there was a lot of duplication here, 30 and a half FTEs. And so this was an area where we felt we could get tighter on.
your turn. Go ahead.
Dr. Curtis, I don't know if this is a question for you or Dr. Valentino, but looking at the OTL budget, I don't see TAG, DLI, or ESL in here, so I'm just trying, and it wasn't on the original chart. I mean, I realize that chart wasn't the whole detailed chart yet. Oh,
Yeah.
Do you want to answer?
how is that being budgeted or handled? And I assume
It
it's
is
still
there, it's
OTL?
just deeper down in OTL, so.
Okay.
The dual language program and the ESL program still exist, and they're embedded in the organizational chart. And once the actual organizational chart is finalized, you will see those 2 strands inside of the OTL one.
Okay, but and it's somewhere in this budget, just not, it's somewhere in
Yeah,
here.
it's in there.
Okay, thank you.
That's the thing you're not hearing today from all the departments is what is that reimagined org chart looking forward, because we're in the midst of posting this. We reduced and are adding back very strategically a much more limited number of elevated positions that can lead this work. Okay, I'll be brief, because it's just me and my confidential assistant. Do you want me to give you the 1 minute?
Sure.
These are a few things I do.
He's going to go the fastest, but it has the smallest print.
Can you read it?
Uh,
Where's the sleeve out there?
not a lot. So just try to be out there, try to make sure, working with our cabinet level of leaders to continue to move the school system forward across our portfolio, given sort of the different needs. But that's, you can read that. High level, just the top part of the org chart, which represents my direct reports, 2 deputies. You've met one. We'll backfill the other side for business and ops. That'll be posted in the next 48 hours. General counsel, chief of staff, and newly minted talent and culture department. And that matters because there's a couple of other areas you'll see under the superintendent. And one of them is the racial equity work, which I'll talk about in a second, with 3 elements that works in collaboration with other programs and departments. Those that are specific student initiatives that move and support specific underserved student groups, community partnerships, because oftentimes they are the ones that have the expertise and they're valued partners, and how we leverage those and evaluate their add value and impact. And then serving the diverse learners that we have to have a workforce that reflects our families. And so how do we work with our talent and culture department to really be active in our recruitment and development of a diverse workforce? So those are 3 elements there. Don't have a strategic specific plan detailed out on these 3, partly because it would be presumptuous. So we'll be inviting the advisory council to help co-construct that. I've already been in conversations with many stakeholders on this topic. On the left side, to the system performance conversation, all of this work, what I find has been anemic in the organization is any ability to really track against key performance indicators, performance metrics across each department. There are no evidence of balance scorecards that we're reporting on a quarterly basis to the board. And we don't have a way to really accurately do program evaluation of grants, investments that we make, et cetera. And so how do we know that unless we're able to disaggregate by student served, by program internally or externally or in the community, to kind of gauge whether there's a return on investment. This also includes sort of the broader assessment portfolio. Obviously that's going to be connected to teaching and learning, but we need a check and balance for not just localized formatives, but also state testing. So we're able to sort of keep that data bank all together so we can work with it as we do. So this is a small team that's been here working under IT. I'm just bifurcating it. And for the moment, we'll be giving them direction. I think the board saw on my entry some of the ways that I have tracked school capacity and improvement over time. We'll get to a point where we can start scatter plotting the building capacity of our schools to be able to serve and accelerate student learning once all of these ingredients start to get into place. And then we can have very informed conversations about what's working and what's not. So that's sort of the wish there. If you go to the next page, I only make reference to the racial equity plan because it's a 5-year plan. It expired 2 years ago, by the way. We called for annual performance reports. I haven't seen any. So I want to pick up on the good thinking. There might be. I just haven't seen them. We want to pick up on the good work that was done there and sort of what did we learn? How do we use that as a springboard to the next 5-year plan? And how do we work with the broader community to develop that? And what might be some of the elements on it. I talked about sort of 3 components that I see would need to be an integrated part of that effort. Those 3 areas. There's going to budget in this Equity 2.0 that I'm calling it work. There's some personnel because we do have some student advisors that work out, 1 per cohort, keeping an eye on where those areas are that require support that are going to be really important moving forward to inform some gap areas. There's some contracts. There's been a reduction there overall, but it's about $5 million now set aside. Once we identify what are the needs, so we can start to think about what providers would be a match in some of those areas. We can't begin to replicate some of that work because they're doing a pretty good job with it right now in some cases. And then the talent diversity work is a position or 2 in HR to help us do some of that work. That's just a percentage point of our overall general fund going towards racial equity priorities. Of course, that lens should be throughout all of our departments. And then I talked about the system performance work, but it really would cover that team would start to really organize data across all of these areas, both student, school, and program. So we have evaluation of progress monitoring. So there's 7 FTE. I think there's a small reduction there, and some work to do that, including some outsourced evaluation or program or grant evaluation that sometimes is a requirement. So that's my quick pass.
So I just see that Karina just gave us the answer to the high school programs. PCC and PSU dual credits, is that to pay actually for the credits for the kids?
So some of that, so I don't have the entire list, but when I look at that, those are the big picture, the bigger buckets that would come under that would be our dual credit contracts that serve our kids district-wide.
Okay.
So the Jefferson PCC used to come out of that bucket, and all the other schools have increased, as we all have, our dual credit opportunities across the system. So that would be one place, that would be probably, I would guess, the largest ticket item in that, under that category. We also pay for our, just really basic things like our high school graduation ceremonies, where we have to rent, what's the old building?
Coliseum.
Thank you, Memorial Coliseum. So that comes out of that. So there's things like that that are kind of just generally how we're doing the business about running our high schools.
Okay, we'll pick up where we left off. You don't have to pay attention to the last slide. It's kind of where we left there, but we'll dive deeper into the other departments that we didn't mention today on the operational side. And we'll go into a little bit more of the detail. We listed all the questions you asked today. Hopefully you'll get some responses in more detail in those areas that you're interested in.
Thank you. So can I just, it'd be helpful to have, so this is all in percentages, to actually have dollar amounts of what that is. And then, I was trying to crosswalk over, like, where is it in here? Because one of the things is, when it's in here, you have some context of last year, whether it's up or down. So a budget is a priority, like how you fund your priorities. So to see like what the dollar amount is, and then how it has fluctuated from last year, are we down and up or down?
Yeah, by department. Okay. Yeah, and the book, generally speaking, the book is used by program and account, and this is by department, by budget owner. So that's
So it's multi-funded, and in some cases, the amount may appear inflated or deflated, but they're imagining entirely different work.
Right, it's just, I guess, the board's approving of the budget to know, are we, you know, is our budget generally a shift in priorities? Because it's not clear, and if it is, how much so, and then what are we intentionally not doing or doing less of? But to know that before we actually.
So to flip that is, instead of sort of translating it, or maybe along with, translating back into here to do a comparison, which in some ways, looking at this book doesn't give you much information. Is there a way to see the dollar amount percentages on a department basis?
Well, that's what I meant, just like putting next to the percentage, putting what the dollar number is for what it's projected for 18, 19, and then what's the current.
One of the issues with departments is that we've done such a reorg that to try to do a comparison to last year.
Well, that's why that was more a question of whether that actually made sense.
We could do a department by department listing, and you'll see green arrows and red arrows down, and some of it will have a simple explanation because part of a function moved, and we can try to call out what's a big work strand that we're not doing moving forward. In most cases, that we're adding for the same amount or less resources that we're trying to be efficient about.
So, in some ways it might be, rather than going through that numerical exercise, which we've got a lot of fruits and vegetables that are aligning a qualitative, we're making a substantial, aka 10% or more, greater investment or lesser, well, that's been kind of.
You already know about the 65 positions.
Yeah.
I
So
guess,
you already know we're down.
Yeah.
like, one of the things about percentages, like, if you took 10% increase in the, tag plan writing, it's, it sounds like a lot, but it's actually 10% of $10,000, which isn't very much at all. So I guess I'm trying to think of like, when I vote for this budget, like what is it that we're putting our chips down on in a big way? And what are we not? So that, you know, in 3 months, I'm not going to the superintendent saying, how come you got rid of X? I didn't know that. It's like, well, that was in the budget. So just being intentional, what's in and what's out.
Okay, one last question, because we gotta hit that hearing.
I'm still really confused about where the tag department is in all of this, and where the funding for it is. There's 6,000 to 7,000 tag identified kids, yes, and I'm not really seeing where tag department is in any of these birth charts, so I'm really looking at it.
It's in OTL. Office of Teaching and Learning.
So is it gonna get a nice little box?
It does have one.
It has a
It does have
box.
one. It just doesn't show up in this org,
Okay.
in the draft org chart.
Okay.
It's the next level, part two, and yeah.
This is like the top tier, you know, top, what, 3, 4 levels of the org chart. And then there's all kinds of stuff.
It's not going away and it's not going to get diminished, so. it's a shame.
Okay, so I'm going to adjourn. We've gone a little bit over. We're going to reconvene at 6 downstairs in the boardroom, right?
Yes.
For the budget hearing. So, this is 20 minutes.
And childcare's in here, so, you guys want to watch the kids?
Or we can do my own.